Dumb Husky and his white cat Shizun. Chapter 268. Tianyan Pavilion. Return to Wushan Palace. After saying this, Taxian Jun moved his finger and the little dragon immediately wrapped itself tighter around Shi Mei's member. Shi Mei's expression changed. It was obvious that he was in pain, but he always cherished his face. Even at this time, he tried his best to maintain his composure. "Mo Ran, how dare you spy on me?" Taxian Jun sneered. "Interesting. Tell me, is there anything in this world that I wouldn't dare to do? Let me introduce you. This is a clone of Wangli, the demon dragon of Mount Xiao. It only listens to the orders of the Nangong clan." Taxian Jun glanced at him. "You don't know how to restrain yourself in my territory. I think you're really tired of living." The veins on Shi Mei's forehead were bulging. It was obvious that he was very angry. He didn't expect that the blood contract with Mount Xiao could be used like this. He didn't dare to be too arrogant, so he just said, "Withdraw this disgusting thing from me." Taxian Jun didn't say anything. He stared at the place where the demon dragon was wrapped around for a while and then sneered, "Then you have to promise that you would not take out that disgusting thing in front of me again." Shi Mei was so angry that he had to interrupt Mo Ran. With a dark face he asked, "Who are you calling disgusting? Whoever is tied up will be the one." "Chu Wanning." Glancing at the tied up Chu Wanning, Taxian Jun frowned and corrected himself, "It's whoever is naked." Chu Wanning. There were too many misunderstandings, so Taxian Jun simply waved his hand and said towards Chu Wanning, "I wasn't talking about you." Shi Mei said, "Mo Ran, you're so funny." But even so, he still put on his robe with a serious face. He then looked at Mo Ran and said, "Fine, can you untie it now? There's no rush. Go out first and walk further away. When you're almost at the back of the mountain, it will let go by itself." Taxian Jun said lazily, "But let me remind you that if you try to touch what's mine again, it's already familiar with your scent. Even if you're outside Mount Xiao, it'll chase after you and strangle you." The most despicable people were indeed invincible. No wonder he alone was on top of the world. Shi Mei left in dismay. Then, only Taxian Jun and the venerable Baidu Immortal were left in the room. Taxian Jun walked over and stretched out his hand. He saw Chu Wanning's eyes that were clearly filled with sharpness and hostility, but also somewhat moist as he stretched out his hand. Probably because of those years of imprisonment, Chu Wanning immediately thought of his tyranny and almost instantly tensed up. Taxian Jun sighed in his heart, but he didn't know why his heart softened. He put his hand on Chu Wanning's forehead. "It's not as hot as before." Taxian Jun didn't have much expression on his face. "He's a little useless, but his medicine is really good." After a pause he said coldly, "I won't let that bastard humiliate you in the future. No one is allowed to touch what's mine. You can rest assured." He didn't know that Chu Wanning's memory had been erased by Shi Mei and temporarily returned to that of the other life, so he had no idea how much his words had shocked Chu Wanning. Mo Ran actually called Shi Mei a bastard. Taxian Jun didn't pay attention to Chu Wanning's expression. In fact, he had been avoiding looking at him directly. He knew himself well. If he looked at him a few more times, he was afraid that he would lose control. And in Chu Wanning's current state, it would be more difficult for him to bear. If it was in the past, he probably wouldn't have felt any pity. But he had been alone in the other world for so long. He couldn't even decide whether he wanted to live or die, so he could only live like a living dead. Seeing Chu Wanning again, his cold heart seemed to regain a vague warmth. It was this warmth that made him not as irritable as before. He untied the rope for Chu Wanning. When he saw the bright red marks on his wrists, he even subconsciously rubbed them twice to ease the pain. But then he realized what he was doing, so he stopped. He really didn't know what was wrong with him. After a while, Shi Mei's memory disorder spell gradually weakened, so Chu Wanning's eyes began to become confused. But in this strange dizziness, his face was still pale. He endured the pain in his head and said, "Mo Ran. He's back." It didn't matter whether he was awake or in a dream. After so many years, a long-cherished wish in his heart had been fulfilled. Chu Wanning said almost hoarsely, "So, don't hate me anymore." Taxian Jun looked at him. Probably feeling that this dream was coming to an end, Chu Wanning closed his eyes, raised his hand that was still red and touched Taxian Jun's face, turned back. Something seemed to collapse in the bottom of his heart. Taxian Jun stared at him without blinking. Blankness also floated on his face, like a thin layer of smoke. Chu Wanning frowned and was actually a little choked up. Further ahead is a dead end. Turn back, don't go any further. He held his cheeks. The venerable Yuhang of the night sky, who was floating amidst the memories of 2 lives, looked at Taxian Jun, who was already a living dead. 2 lives had passed, leaving the 2 of them in tatters. Chu Wanning's voice was hoarse. "Mo Ran, why is your face so cold?" It was as cold as ice. "If possible, I'm willing to be a candle, waiting for you to turn back at the crossroads in the winter night. I'm willing to burn my life to light your path home. But why are you so cold? I don't know how long I can burn. What if I'm exhausted and burn out? What if you're still walking in the dark and not willing to turn back once I'm extinguished? What should I do then?" Chu Wanning's fingers trembled slightly and he closed his eyes. He had been alone all his life, with no relatives or friends, so he wasn't afraid of leaving. But when he thought that maybe even if he burned out his life, he still wouldn't be able to warm Mo Ran's cold heart, he felt very guilty. When he thought that if he was extinguished then that young man who wanted to turn back one day wouldn't find the way back, he felt that he should live. Waiting one more day would be good. Maybe tomorrow, the ice would melt. That man would turn back, walk out of the endless night and turn towards the place where the lights were waning. In the next few days, under the influence of Shi Mei's spell and the fluctuation of his own memories of 2 lives, Chu Wanning spent less time awake and more time sleeping. Every time he woke up, his mind was scattered and the things he remembered were fragmented and incomplete. After some time, Taxian Jun realized what was going on. He felt a bit relief. Chu Wanning was disorientated and his thoughts were muddled. It would be easy to coerce him in his current condition. He could force himself on him and the next day, when he woke up, he might not remember that it had happened. And because of the fragmented memories, Chu Wanning always thought that he was dreaming, so he was less alert than usual. Although a cat with sharp claws was interesting, a large cat who was as soft as milk dumpling is rare. He had to admit that he felt that Hua Binan did a good thing. "How many things did you remember today?" This became the question he always asked Chu Wanning when he woke up in the morning. And Chu Wanning would always frown and ask him, "What?" It was rare for him to be patient and answer, "Did your memory stop at our last life after we got married or did it change to other days?" At this time, he would mostly wait for Chu Wanning's embarrassed face and a low voice saying, "Mo Weiyu, are you crazy?" It was not a good thing. If it was in the past, he would have slapped him. Taxian Jun also slapped him, but the momentum was gentle and then the other hand would follow. It didn't look like a slap at all, but more like 2 palms holding the other person's face. He sneered, but there was a trace of satisfaction in his eyes. "Very good. If you continue like this then it will be even better." He really didn't want Chu Wanning to remember the things of this life and he didn't want him to remember Mo Weiyu who had become a grandmaster. It seemed that as long as Chu Wanning was confused, they could go back to that year in the Wushan Palace. No matter how much Chu Wanning hated him, the 2 of them would still be together day and night. His Shizun, his Wanning, belonged to him alone. Hua Binan mocked him, "You're jealous of yourself, you're not as narrow-minded as a woman." Jealous? Taxian Jun thought that it wasn't the case. Just that if there's an animal or an object that had been with you for a long time, you would develop a feeling similar to a habit. That was it. It was a sunny day on Mount Xiao. Taxian Jun forced Chu Wanning to rest with him under the orange tree. He looked at the fragrant white flowers and sighed lazily. It's just that it lacks some flavor. It would be nice if it was a haitang tree. Chu Wanning's consciousness was still blurry. He still thought that this was one of his dreams. So, he said, why are you so picky even in dreams? Taxian Jun turned over on the lawn, leaned over and rested his head on his knees. Their eyes met and Taxian Jun said, it's always been like that, right? I'm hungry. When we go back later, you can cook a bowl of porridge for me. I want egg and lean meat porridge. The egg shouldn't be too cooked, the porridge shouldn't be too thick, just put a little bit of meat. You know how to cook, right? I've taught you many times. Chu Wanning didn't want to go, but he was dragged by Taxian Jun until he couldn't do anything but follow. In the end, he had to go with him to the kitchen in the back hall of the sacrificial hall. The firewood was burning, the rice was washed and the water started to boil. Taxian Jun sat at the small table, supporting his cheeks with his hands as he looked at Chu Wanning's agitated and helpless expression. Fortunately, Chu Wanning thought that this was a dream, so he didn't want to waste too much energy resisting him. As for Taxian Jun, he knew that this dream would eventually shatter, so he cherished it more than ever. The water boiled and the smell of rice and meat floated out from under the wooden lid. Taxian Jun changed his posture and placed his hands under his chin. He felt that he had a lot of things to say to Chu Wanning, but he felt that it was meaningless to say them. Even if he said them, they would all be in vain. In the end, he moved his lips, and said in a low and lazy voice, "Hey." What was he going to say? Actually, he didn't know what he wanted to say either. Thus, after some thought, he said solemnly, "Remember to put salt." "Yes." "Then remember to taste it." A hint of amusement and relief flashed through Taxian Jun's dark purple eyes as he said, "Don't count on killing me with the salt." As he spoke, he got up and walked behind Chu Wanning. He glanced into the pot, then suddenly raised his hand and hugged the warm man in front of him. He caressed Chu Wanning's ear and lowered his eyes. "I still want to torture you for the rest of your life." Mo Weiyu. Sensing the man's stiffness, he hugged him even tighter and even couldn't resist kissing him on the neck. His long eyelashes fluttered. "What are you doing? I've taught you how to make porridge for so long, but you are still unwilling to make a bowl of porridge for me?" Chu Wanning was rendered speechless by the bandit's logic. He struggled to come up with some harsh words to refute him, but before he could open his mouth and even make a sound, Taxian Jun's lips already covered his. He hugged the fire he had lost and returned to the world of flowers. Amidst the smoke of the burning firewood, he, who was already a living dead, kissed Chu Wanning heartily and affectionately. His cold lips were wrapped in warmth. His Shizun, his Wanning, his consort Chu. No one could take him away, and he refused to give him up to anyone else. When the kiss reached its intense point, Taxian Jun's head became dizzy. He pressed him to the table. He kissed Chu Wanning's red and swollen lips from time to time and reached out to take off Chu Wanning's clothes. He used to do this kind of darn thing, and when he was in the mood, even if someone wanted to see him for something urgent, he wouldn't care. There was even one insane instance when he felt a sudden ardent desire to make love with his Shizun, who had just been recently conferred the title of Consort Chu. He was in the middle of attending court at Wushan Palace and was supposed to have a meeting with some monks from Wuebei Temple who were petitioning him due to a disaster in the Yellow River. He was annoyed and didn't want to stop being with his consort Chu. So, he ordered a layer of curtain to be put down to cover him and Chu Wanning, who was entangled on the rosewood, surfaced and ordered the monks to be sent in. "Don't make a sound. I told the people outside that I was asking for concubine Chu's favor, so I left you some face." At that time, he was pressing on Chu Wanning's body and he was panting heavily. "If you make a sound, those bald donkeys will know that the person I'm fucking is you." Mo Weiyu. The person under him was extremely humiliated and his eyes were red. "You bastard." Taxian Jun's only response to this was more ferocious and hard thrusts, as well as a light mockery that was filled with lust. "Darling, your lower half is already so hot and wet, so why is your upper half still so hard? Don't moan because of the pleasure later." The monks came in without knowing this. What they saw was the blurry but tall figure of Taxian Jun through the thin layer of yellow gauze and a pair of slender and tight legs, which were weakly spread wide, trembling with the rough penetration of Taxian Jun. His fingertips were delicate and cold, like bluebell flowers trembling with the rain. The request was delivered in a confused and vague way, and Mo Ran didn't hear much of it. He only remembered that Chu Wanning had endured to the extreme at that time. He didn't make any sound. Tears flowed from the corners of his eyes that were as red as rouge. The moment he reached his climax, he suddenly convulsed and tensed up. He was in extreme discomfort but endured the pleasure. He bit his lips and refused to moan. It was too exciting. After the monks left, he couldn't hold back anymore. He lifted one of Chu Wanning's weak legs, put it on his shoulder and penetrated more fiercely from the side. "Wanning, don't hold back anymore, no one's around now." But Chu Wanning's mind was muddled and he only remembered that he couldn't make a sound. Taxian Jun leaned over and kissed his blood-stained lips, swallowing the stench of rust. "We're alone now." He then flipped Chu Wanning over so that he was in front of him and thrusted into him upwards. His hot and hard cock plunged inside that wet and tight hole as he stretched out a hand to caress the man's solid chest that was wet with tears. The jut in his throat moved and gasped a hot breath as an intense pleasure overcame him. "Feeling good? Is it exciting?" Chu Wanning's forehead was hidden along with his unfocused eyes by the messy soft quilt cushion. Mo Ran's cock was too long and every time he trusted in, he felt as if he would penetrate through his abdomen. He slightly opened his thin lips, as his fingers clenched the silk cover. The person behind him thrusted faster and faster, the rhythm turned into a frantic pace. When reached orgasm, he trusted so deep that it seemed as if his sack was going to be squeezed in as well. His spent sprayed into the depths of his wet and sticky passage and Chu Wanning was so incited that his whole body trembled. Mo Ran was always like this. He knew where his sensitive spot was and whenever he was about to reach his climax, he would thrust and come on that spot. Feeling the thick semen within, Chu Wanning's mind became blank. He couldn't help but slightly close his eyes and moan, "Ah!" But this was not the end. Mo Ran was still full of energy and after pressing on his body for a while, the spent cock that was still buried within his body swelled up again. Mo Ran opened his dark eyes and stared at Chu Wanning through his slightly sweaty forehead. His gaze burned inch by inch. From his moist and blurred eyes to his bitten lips. All the way down, he suddenly lowered his head to his chest and sucked on his protruding nipples. Chu Wanning, whose mind was already in a mess, was off guard and couldn't help but let out a muffled groan. Then his leg was lifted up high again. He gasped for breath and endured that hot rod which penetrates his body again and again. "Ah, ah." He shook his head, and when he heard his own heavy breathing, he couldn't help but raise his hand to his lips and bite it. The light in his eyes became more and more shattered. His hole was already very wet as Mo Ran's spent turned into a lubricant, creating the sticky smacking wet sound of two men intensely making love. "Don't bite your hand." Chu Wanning wouldn't listen to him and still bit his wrist, trying to block the sound coming out of him. Mo Ran cursed and with one hand on the bed, he grabbed Chu Wanning's arm with the other and pulled him down. "Hold me." "What are you doing, ah?" Without giving him time to react, Mo Ran lifted him up from the low bed, and the man who had lost his support pressed all his weight on Mo Ran. Mo Ran laughed softly and kissed him, "You're not that heavy." As he spoke, he carried him like this and wanted to walk into the inner hall. With his hard erection still inside his Shizun's body, this position only pushed him deeper into Chu Wanning's hole with every step he took. He didn't know if it was a coincidence or on purpose, but Mo Ran's burning hot rod continuously pressed into Chu Wanning's prostate. Every time it was poked, his toes couldn't help but curled, but he still stubbornly refused to cry out and only stared fiercely at his disciple in front of him with a pair of dark eyes. "Why do you keep looking at me?" Mo Ran chuckled, and suddenly stopped walking, but he still held Chu Wanning's leg, and gently thrust it upward slightly. "You like it like this?" It was too humiliating, but his body had long been trained by Mo Ran to respond accordingly. Chu Wanning frowned and took in small breaths. His face couldn't help but turn red. He could clearly feel the sticky fluid flowing down from the place where the two of them were connected, and as Mo Ran moved in and out, the obscenity of it became more and more outrageous. Mo Ran held him like this for a while and seemed to be unable to bear it any longer. He glanced gloomily at the back of the hall, as if he was tired of walking too far. Thus, he simply pressed him down on the cold floor of the hall where he usually held court. He didn't want to wait any longer, and only felt that his cock was wrapped around something warm, slick, and wet, so he pressed Chu Wanning down on the floor and started fiercely thrusting inside, moving almost frantically. Ah! Ah! The passion was so intense, it felt like his soul was about to be sucked out. No matter how much Chu Wanning endured, he couldn't help lose his mind in this mind-blowing sexual intercourse. His legs were wide open, hanging on Mo Ran's tight waist. His body shook and trembled with the man's passion. For a moment, he even thought that Mo Ran wanted to take his life like this. Wushan Palace was in a mess, and there was no one else in the majestic hall, only the two naked men who were entangled together. Mo Ran breathed heavily and sweat gathered on his waist. He hugged his Shizun, who was in a daze after being fucked hard by him, and firmly pushed his lower body. In his ears, he heard Chu Wanning's slow and suppressed moans and occasional groans. Wanning. Hot kisses covered Chu Wanning's slightly opened lips. Because he was so passionate, Mo Ran's meridians and blood vessels bulged on his neck. His body was so hot, his eyes felt like they were burning. He rubbed against him and held him tight. After a long time, amidst the lingering kiss and rapid passionate thrusts, Mo Ran suddenly pressed Chu Wanning hard to the floor and covered Chu Wanning's mouth and nose, leaving only a pair of eyes that were out of focus. He used his strength to fiercely push in, so deep that his toes were slightly white from the force. "I'm going to come." "Wanning. Is it here?" Chu Wanning was almost driven crazy by his violent and energetic fucking. His hands hung weakly on the cold stone surface, and his body was completely opened by Mo Ran. He couldn't stop the trembling from the intense stimulation that was almost painful. Mo Ran panted, his voice was sexy and his eyes were dark. He turned Chu Wanning's face, and said, "Is it here?" The large and fat head of his cock pressed against that sensitive muscle deep in Chu Wanning's body, and with one push, Chu Wanning suddenly opened his slightly closed eyes. There was a faint red of unwillingness and humiliation at the corners of his eyes. He trembled under Mo Ran, but was held tightly by a pair of big hands. Mo Ran breathed deeply in his ear, and said, "Don't move, darling, I'm coming." Ah! When he climaxed, the man let out a low groan, and then the thick liquid of love gushed out forcefully, pouring into the deepest part of Chu Wanning's body. Chu Wanning couldn't help but close his eyes and convulse, as if lightning had passed through his body. His body felt numb, as if his soul was leaving his body. "Wanning, does it feel good? Did I make you feel good?" At that time, Chu Wanning couldn't answer anything, and in any ways. Whether to curse or to scold, he simply couldn't. His mind has long gone blank, and between his wide-opened long legs, his disciples' spent flowed out. After that, they would often do it again on the throne, in the main hall, or on the stairs, or even against the wall. The intensity and wildness of Taxian Jun knew no bounds. This kind of torrid sex would have been an ecstasy if it was out of gentle feelings, as even though it was done out of revenge and to cause humiliation, it was still extremely pleasurable. At this moment, in the depths of Mount Qiao, Taxian Jun gazed at Chu Wanning's thin face. He silently recalled the events of the past with a faint trace of curiosity in his heart. He didn't know if Chu Wanning had ever been curious as to why, even though he was virile and sexually active, he didn't have a child with Song Kuitong. Fact was, although he had once favored that woman, he never really desired her. He never wished to have a child with Song Kuitong. Even when he slept with her, he made sure to avoid making her pregnant. He didn't even like coming inside of her. Perhaps it was because of his own situation and past experience. Perhaps because of his own birth, he felt that two people who didn't have honest and lifelong feelings towards each other should not have children. However, it was strange. He hated Chu Wanning so much, but in the back of his mind, and with how much he fucked Chu Wanning day and night, he felt that it would be great if he could get him pregnant. Was it out of desire to conquer? Out of revenge? Possessiveness? Was it as a more humiliating punishment compared to taking his consort Chu against his will? He didn't know. Amidst all of these questionable thoughts, he dragged Chu Wanning again and again into the abyss of sin and lust along with him. End chapter. Dumb Husky and his white cat Shizun. Chapter 269. Tianyan Pavilion. Separation between kings and men. As he got lost in his thoughts, Taxian Jun pulled off the belt around the waist of the person under him. His robes parted, revealing the bruises underneath. He paused, as if he had thought of something. His eyes were dark and hot, as if there were two clumps of fire within the ashes. After a while, Taxian Jun closed his eyes and sighed, "Forget it." He knew that should he continue, he would probably end up hurting Chu Wanning again. Today, this venerable one will spare you. Amidst the tranquility of this place, he finally let go of the person in his arms and did not do anything that was too excessive. But he still lowered his head, his Adam's apple moved as he kissed his lover from his eyebrows, all the way down. Finally, he came down to his neck and he bit it with his white teeth. Then he straightened up and pulled up the man who was pressed against the table. The porridge was cooked, bubbling, and simmering. Taxian Jun clumsily tidied up Chu Wanning's clothes and coughed softly. His voice was still deep and warm, "The porridge is ready. Go, get a bowl." His actions confused Chu Wanning, but then it's normal for Taxian Jun to be temperamental. Moreover, Chu Wanning still thought this was just a dream, so he did not probe too much into it. Besides, it was more comfortable to eat rather than to get down and dirty. So, he did not say anything more and opened the lid of the pot. "Serve me. You want to stuff yourself to death." Taxian Jun smiled faintly and said, "You can try." Then he sat down at the table. Although he really wanted to go over and see what Chu Wanning's pot of porridge looked like, he still had to put on the airs of an emperor. Thus, he pretended to sit upright at the table and even put on a nonchalant expression. However, when the porridge was served, Taxian Jun could not continue to be indifferent anymore. The porridge was overcooked, there was too much water and it didn't seem to taste good. Although he hadn't touched the spoon yet, he already knew that it was a familiar taste that he had not tasted for a long time. "Eat." Taxian Jun stared at the small bowl in front of him for a long time. He stirred the porridge with the spoon but did not put the porridge into his mouth. Chu Wanning glanced at him. "If you don't eat, it'll get cold." "Oh." He scooped up the porridge and brought it to his lips. Then, he put down his hands hesitantly. Chu Wanning finally noticed that something was wrong with him and asked, "What's wrong?" "It's nothing," Taxian Jun smiled, still looking at him with disdain. "This porridge is cooked terribly. I don't want to eat it. It's too stuffy here. I'm going out for some fresh air." After he finished speaking, he pushed the untouched bowl of porridge away, got up, and walked towards the door. When he was about to reach the door, Chu Wanning's voice sounded behind him. "If you don't eat this." Chu Wanning's voice was very calm. It was a calmness that had been tempered by him many times. "I'll throw away the whole pot. In any case, the things he made for him were usually discarded. It had been like this since the day he had been knocked to the ground. Taxian Jun immediately turned around. "Don't touch it. I mean." He coughed to cover up his loss of composure. "Just leave it." "Why?" "It's none of your business." He opened the door curtain and went out. Under the eaves, he closed his eyes and sighed heavily. He was actually a corpse. No matter how much he looked like a living person, he was still a walking corpse. Unlike a living person, he could no longer eat. Years ago, he had committed suicide in Wushan Palace and was turned into a living dead by Hanlin divine hands. Hanlin came to this world through the gate of time and space, life and death, and he was left in that broken other life and had been acting in accordance to what he has been ordered to. Just like that, it had been nearly 10 years. In the years since he had been turned into a walking dead, he did not eat anything. But since he was never a glutton, he had never felt regret about this. Until today, when he sat in front of that bowl of porridge, he suddenly felt dejected. Why was he no longer alive? He had waited for so many years and finally, in just a few days, he had obtained a Chu Wanning that completely belonged to him. But he couldn't even drink a bowl of porridge made by that person. What did Chu Wanning's porridge taste like? He stood under the eaves and tried to recall with his eyes closed. After a long time, he suddenly raised his arm and covered his eyelashes. No one could see what kind of expression he had at this time. Only his pale lips and his thin chin could be seen. Then he put down his arm and opened his eyes. The corners of his eyes were slightly red. His memory was not good and he was not very smart. If the tip of his tongue could still taste a bit of sour, sweet, bitter, and saltiness, he might be able to recall. But his bones and blood were ice cold and his mouth could no longer taste anything. So even if the bowl of porridge was in front of him, he could not remember what it tasted like. He would never know. Late that night, he went to find Shimei. Beside the cold pond in front of the sacrificial temple, the handsome man was barefooted. His toes touched the cold spring water and stirred up the starry reflection in the water. Seeing that he had come, Shimei raised his eyebrows slightly as if he knew why he had come. His expression was cold as he said, "Such a beautiful scene. I didn't expect that the emperor would have the mood to come and find me instead of accompanying Grand Master Chu in the secret chamber." Taxian Jun did not want to beat around the bush, so he asked directly, "Do you have a way to temporarily make me the same as I was when I was still alive?" Shimei looked at him up and down and said, "Although you are a living dead, it should not affect your performance in bed." This venerable one wasn't talking about that. "Oh? Then what are you talking about?" "Eating." Taxian Jun said coldly, "I want to eat something." Shimei's eyes were gloomy and he asked thoughtfully, "Do you want to eat a bowl of wontons?" "No one in the world can make a good bowl of wonton except my Shikshan." Shimei smiled, "It's rare that you think of him today." Taxian Jun's memory of Shimei was messy and unstable. Sometimes he could recall him and sometimes he couldn't. But generally speaking, he had no impression of Shimei most of the time. So, when he heard Taxian Jun mention his Shikshan just now, Shimei couldn't help but feel a sense of novelty. He asked, "Aya, how can you think about your Mingjing Shikshan when you were in the company of Chu Wanning all day long?" This is what it was like when two people did not know each other. After a while, Taxian Jun said, "You said that my body is too full of yin energy and before I get a new spiritual core and be reborn completely, I should not see my Shikshan. Since he is of water attribute, I might hurt him otherwise." Shimei was not embarrassed flat out lie at all, indeed. "So, why are you asking for wontons?" Taxian Jun looked at him coldly and snapped, "Don't you know not to bring this matter up?" Shimei smiled, "I'm just curious. In this world, other than wonton, what other food would His Majesty, who had tasted all sorts of delicacies, would miss?" "What? You don't want to say it? Then let me guess, it was something that Grand Master Chu cooked for you, right? Seeing the slight change in Taxian Jun's expression, Shimei smiled and said, I heard that Grandmaster Chu is the worst at cooking in Shi Shengpeak. You are really interesting to be able to swallow his food. Taxian Jun's face became darker. Just tell me if there is a way. Don't be so long-winded. There is definitely a way and I have already told you. Taxian Jun frowned. What is it? The old way. Shimei said softly, we need to take Grandmaster Mo's spiritual core as soon as possible and give it to you. Then, you will be exactly the same as when you were alive. A tangerine flower floated over the water. Shimei moved his toes and caught the fragrant flower between his toes. Although the flower was white, it was not as delicate as Shimei's skin. Shimei smiled and looked at the flower that was trapped by his feet and Thursday's could no longer float. He said, let's work together. The earlier we get his spiritual core, the earlier I can obtain your complete power and the earlier you can eat what you want to eat. After a pause, he lifted his soft eyelashes. You can see the person you've yearned for day and night. So, please cooperate with me, Your Majesty. Previously, you wanted me to go to Gaiyuye sect to massacre people and then you wanted me to summon an army of Zhenlong chess pieces to attack Shi Shengpeak. I did all these. How do you want this venerable one to cooperate with you this time? Just tell this venerable one all at once. Shimei clapped his hands and smiled. Good, that's great. Actually, there are not many things that I need you to do next. There is only one thing left. Go on. You need to come with me to Tianyan Pavilion. Our game of chess has come to an end. It's time to close the net. When he said this, Taxian Jun noticed a golden feathered pigeon perched behind Shimei. It was the spiritual bird that the Tianyan Pavilion used to send messages. The Tianyan Pavilion sent you news. Yes. Shimei stretched out two long fingers and held a thin piece of paper. It's all good news. Everything is going according to our plan. It's no good to be a virtuous person. Grandmaster Mo sacrificed his spiritual core to protect the peace of the cultivation world, but no one helped him to absolve him of his crimes. He smiled and twisted his fingers. With a spell, he folded the letter into a paper butterfly and threw it at Taxian Jun. Read this yourself. There's no need. Taxian Jun took the paper butterfly but didn't open it. He looked at Shimei with his black eyes. Just tell, when do we do it? The trial will be in 3 days. The execution will be in another 3 days. So, in 6 days. Shimei stroked the wings of the golden-tailed carrier pigeon with a gentle expression. Suddenly, a brightly colored triangular snake darted out of his sleeve and bit the pigeon's neck in a flash. It then swallowed the soft bird into its stomach in an instant. All of this happened in a flash. Shimei's expression didn't change, as if he was used to it. He smiled and brushed away a broken feather. He raised his head and said, "That's right, so we'll stay in Mount Jiao Mountain for 3 more days. Then we'll go to the Tianyan Pavilion and wait." The feather fell into the pond, creating gentle ripples in the water, shattering the reflections of the 2 men on the shore. His spiritual core will give you infinite power. In this way, you'll have everything you want. After this conversation, Taxian Jun returned to the secret room on Mount Jiao with a heavy heart. Chu Wanning didn't seem to be in good spirits. He seemed to have fallen asleep while reading a book on the table. His white sleeves fluttered like the falling snow. Taxian Jun stood beside him and watched for a while. It's just this man, a single lamp and a green book. He had experienced the utmost prosperity, had possessed the best luxuries and had seen all kinds of beauties. Chu Wanning was nothing. What was there to see? He thought irritably, but still the jut on his throat rolled. He couldn't help but lean over and hug the other man. He buried his face in the man's neck and nuzzled it. Chu Wanning was awakened by this and opened his eyes. His phoenix eyes were confused and gentle at first, but then he remembered the cruelty of Taxian Jun in front of him. His eyes suddenly became cold and sharp. All these changes were seen by Taxian Jun. The frustration and unwillingness in his heart grew more and more like wild grass. In the end, he couldn't bear it anymore and quickly picked Chu Wanning up. "What are you, With a muffled groan, he was pushed against the wall. Taxian Jun passionately and desperately kissed him, from the neck to his lips, from the lips to his chin. He breathed deeply and asked, "Do you like me? Chu Wanning, do you like me? What are you doing? Why are you suddenly?" However, Taxian Jun didn't seem be interested to hear his answer. It seemed that he just wanted to ask this question and did care much what exactly the answer was. Or perhaps it was because no matter what the answer was, the bridge had been broken and there was no turning back. So, no matter what the answer was, it was useless. If this venerable one was not Taxian Jun but instead a grandmaster like yourself, would you be willing to be with me? Would you have treated me better? He bit the side of Chu Wanning's neck again, as if he wanted to suck his blood. It seemed that this was the only way to prove that the person in his arms belonged to him and not to the Moran who was so different from him. But the moment he lowered his eyes, his voice became hoarse. "In the end, do you like him more than you like me?" "Moran, what are you talking about?" That's right, Chu Wanning's memory was still fragmented. He only had memories of the other life and no memories of this life. Of course, he wouldn't understand what he was saying. It was probably only at this time that he completely belonged to Taxian Jun. He suddenly felt very sad. He didn't know why, but that sadness was even evident in his voice. Taxian Jun was entwined with his lover. In the end, he asked softly, "If I took his spiritual core, would you hate me more?" There was nothing more inexplicable than being denied by yourself. Taxian Jun continued to hold the person in his arms. "But you belong to this venerable one. Don't betray me." When he muttered his own selfish desires, he even felt desolate. Perhaps after being alone for so long, even the sharpest knife would be blunted. 8 years. After he was reborn, how long has he had you? How long have I been alone, waiting in another world? Alone in Wushan Palace, drifting without purpose. Don't leave me again. The first time, I can still die. But if you leave me a second time, I can't even choose death." Taxian Jun frowned. His eyes were gloomy and crazed, sad and obsessed. "I will not be able to bear it." End chapter.